The village of Millhaven was not a cruel place exactly. It was simply a careful one. The people there had worked their land for generations and had learned, the way frontier people do, to hold what they had close and measure strangers at the door before letting them past it. So when the orc woman came into the village at dusk, tall, travel-worn, her green skin pale from the cold, a small child asleep against her shoulder, most doors did not so much slam as simply fail to open. The innkeeper said there was no room, though 2 tables sat empty in his common hall. The healer's wife said her husband was not home, though lamplight moved behind the curtain. A woman drawing water from the village well gathered her bucket and walked away without looking up. They simply went back to their warm houses and their warm fires. And the orc woman was left standing in the lane with her daughter and the dark coming on. Her name was Vora. She had been walking for 4 days along the forest road, sleeping in the leaves of fallen timber, rationing the last of a loaf she had bought at the last settlement. Her daughter Sepha, 8 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn brow, had begun shivering on the 2nd day. By the 3rd, the shivering had turned to fever. By the time they reached Millhaven, the little girl was burning. Vora did not weep easily. She had buried her husband 2 winters past and had not wept then, only later, alone in the dark of their long hall with his sword across her knees. But she came close to it now, standing in the empty lane with Sifa, limp and heavy in her arms, and the lantern light of the village winking at her from behind closed shutters. One more door to try, the grain store at the lane's end where a low light still burned. She knocked, and the door opened. The man who opened it was somewhere in his mid-60s, with the kind of face that has been weathered into patience. Broad in the shoulders, thick-handed, with gray at his temples and steady, unsurprised eyes. He looked at her. He looked at the child in her arms. He said nothing for a moment, only looked at Sepha's flushed face and the way Vora was holding her, both arms pulled close as though she could warm her by sheer will. Then he said, "Bring her inside." His name was Eden. He had farmed the same land at the edge of Millhaven for 40 years, first with his wife, and then, for the last 11 alone. His house was small and plain. A table, 2 chairs, a good fire, and it smelled of wood smoke and grain dust and something simmering on the hook. He pulled a blanket from the chest by the wall and laid it on the hearthrug, set her down here, close to the heat. Vora laid Sepha down. The little girl stirred and did not wake. Eden studied the child for a moment, the color in her cheeks, the shallow pull of her breathing, and then he took his coat from the hook beside the door and put it on. "Where are you going?" Vora said. "Healer lives 3 lanes over," he said. "He'll come if I ask him. His wife said he wasn't home. His wife says that," Eden said, without judgment. "He'll come for me." He went out. Vora sat beside her daughter on the hearthrug and listened to the small sounds of a quiet house. At night, a pot ticking, wind at the single window, Sepha's breathing too fast and too shallow. She pressed the back of her hand to her daughter's forehead and felt the heat there like a coal and said something low and soft in the old tongue. Not quite a prayer, more like a promise. Eden came back with the healer behind him. The man examined Sepha, mixed something from his bag, got it into the half-waking child, and left instructions before he went. Eden ladled soup into a bowl and set it in front of Vora. She ate, barley and dried herbs and salt-cured meat, and it was the best thing she had tasted in 4 days. By the middle of the night, the fever's worst had passed, and what remained in Sepha's face was the ordinary warmth of a sleeping child. Vora sat back against the hearthstone and breathed. Eden had not gone to bed. He sat at the table with a cup of tea gone cold, not watching them, just present, easy in the silence, not asking anything of it. At some point he had put another log on the fire. At some point he had refilled her bowl. Vora looked at him across the dim room. "Why did you open the door?" He thought about it. He was not a man who answered quickly. "Child needed help," he said. "Not a complicated thing. Most people here made it complicated. Most people here make a lot of things complicated," he said. Not with bitterness, only the observation of a man who has known his neighbors long enough to hold no illusions about them and no grudge either. Sepha woke just before dawn, groggy and hungry. When she saw the strange room and the gray-bearded man asleep in his chair, she grabbed Vora's sleeve. Vora spoke to her quietly, and Sepha studied Eden and then announced, in the decided voice of a child who has made up her mind, that he looked like her grandfather. Eden, who had woken at her voice and was pretending he hadn't, said he was sorry to hear it. Sepha asked if there was anything to eat. He made her porridge with a spoonful of autumn honey, and she ate it wrapped in the big blanket and told him about the forest road. The fallen tree they had sheltered under, the copper-colored bird she had seen on the second morning. He listened with the quiet attention of a man who has not heard a child's voice in his house for a very long time. Vora watched them and did not say anything. The riders came at mid-morning. There were 40 of them, strung out along the lane from the village road to Edon's gate. Broad orc men and women in gray and green riding cloaks, their horses' breath clouding in the cold. At their head rode an old orc woman with white braids and a face like carved stone. Beside her, a young man who had Vora's eyes dropped from his horse before it stopped and crossed the yard in 6 strides. The elder dismounted more slowly. She looked at Vora, whole, standing, Sepha at her hip, and something in her face that had been held tight for a long time came loose. 4 months, the elder said. We have been riding 4 months. I know, Vora said quietly. Your husband's clan does not leave its widow to walk the forest roads alone. There was a rebuke in it, and also grief and relief, and the exhaustion of a long search finally ended. Vora turned. Edon was standing in his doorway, watching with the calm expression of a man who has seen most things and is simply watching this one. The elder followed her gaze. She studied him for a moment. The plain coat, the grain dust on his boots, the house behind him small and neat and without pretension, and then she walked across the yard and stopped before him and placed her right fist against her chest and bowed, the deep formal bow that the Greyville gave only to those who had served the clan well. This man sheltered our matriarch-in-waiting and her daughter through the night, she said, loud enough for every rider in the lane to hear. He fetched medicine in the dark. He fed them from his own hearth. She looked at Edon steadily. The Greyvale do not forget. Edon said he hadn't done anything remarkable. The elder said that was exactly the point. There was a gift, a small carved chest from her saddlebag, filled with things whose value Edon did not entirely understand, but that the elder told him were the Greyvale's way of saying what words did not fully reach. He accepted it simply, and with thanks. The riders made ready to move. Sepha had been passed from arm to arm along the line of them, bright with the excitement of 40 horses and 40 new strangers, and was deposited back at her mother's side, flushed and restored. Vora set her down, squared herself, and said something to the elder in the old tongue. The elder nodded once. Then Vora turned and walked back to Edon's door. I told her I would follow in a day or two, she said. Edon looked at her. Sepha is not well enough to ride yet. She seemed well enough to inspect every horse in the lane, he said. She is well enough to be a nuisance, Vora agreed. Not well enough to ride hard. A day or two. He stepped back from the door and held it open. She went past him into the house, and Sepha, who had been standing at a careful distance watching the adults, came at a run and went past them both. The door closed. Outside, the riders moved off down the lane in a jangle of tack and the soft drum of hooves on cold earth, and the village of Millhaven went quiet again in the thin autumn light. Inside, there was the fire. There was the tick of the pot. There was the sound of a child's voice, asking how you made porridge, and whether honey came from a jar or from somewhere else, and a man's patient voice beginning to answer, and the particular warm silence between question and answer. That is the sound of a house beginning, without anyone having announced it, to be a home.